Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about book. I apologise for the visky voice. I have been ill, but we are moving on with these videos. I am doing Criminal Is Read What You Own Challenge, which means my husband has picked out and wrapped up 100 of our books, given them all a number, and I'm picking them one at a time from this little salsa jar. And this time I have read Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. Now, I really enjoyed reading this book because Mark Fisher is one of those authors that I have seen a lot of people refer to, but I have never read any of his original texts. He started off his writing by writing a blog. This isn't one of those blog posts. This is a larger essay, is probably the best way of putting it. And that is, this is, I think, presenting his main thesis and his main theories quite clearly in regard to capitalist realism. And one of the things that Mark Fisher is trying to talk about in this text is the question of, is capitalism really the only option that we have in society, which is a claim that someone has presented, not in regard to that we don't have any other options, for example, communism, but the way capitalism has worked its ideology, we can't really imagine any other viable alternative. And that is sort of capitalism from an ideological standpoint's biggest win. A critique of this book is that he talks about, for example, Stalinism and how you sort of needed a lot of propaganda to sort of keep Stalin in power, and sort of talks about like capitalism doesn't have that. Capitalism absolutely has a lot of ideological power behind it. Probably one of the most important one is the American dream and the way Hollywood has had sort of a cultural sort of empire view and spread the story of the American dream, which means that a lot of critique towards capitalism will very much just be countered with, well, you're just not working hard enough. It's just pull yourself up by your bootstrap, because that is the American dream. So he sort of is I don't think that he sort of is really taking that into account in this text in the way that he's talking about capitalism, like it just grew and expanded out of nowhere and has nothing to do with ideology, despite sort of what he presents it as being an ideology. And one of the things that he, for example, talks a lot about is, of course, the idea of the big other. Now, the idea of the big other isn't from Mark Fisher, but it's an idea that has grown up and talks about how I, as an individual, and society as as sort of a concept, very often interacts with something that is larger than themselves. Now, historically, in the Western world, Christianity and the Christian God would have been placed as the larger other or the big other. So I'm just saying that to give an example of what that would mean. So that would mean that when I was going around living my life, I would do that sort of with this larger other, with the Christian God, always looming around, looking at me and judging me, either positively or negatively, depending on my understanding of what the big other wants. And what Mark Fisher does is he tries to sort of switch this around by saying that just because sort of the Christian God has vanished as the big other for society, it doesn't mean that the big other has sort of vanished, but it's been replaced with capitalism and the capitalist ideology. So he's talking about capitalism as something different than just a way to deal with commerce, a way of dealing with producing and selling and buying goods. So capitalism has now become an ideology and therefore become the big other. And I'm going to read a quote that I really enjoyed about this. Scapegoating an impotent government running around to clean up the messes made by its business friends arises from bad faith, from a continuing hostility to the nanny state that nevertheless goes alongside a refusal to accept the consequences of the sidelining of government in global capitalism. A sign, perhaps, that at the level of political unconsciousness, it is impossible to accept that there are no overall controllers, that the closest things we have to ruling powers now are nebulous, uncountable interest exercising corporate irresponsibility. So he talks here about how if something goes bad, we blame the state. If something is good for us. So in some way, we agree that the state doesn't really have power over us because so much is now controlled by private companies. But yet it's the government who is sort of scapegoated. It's the government's responsibility to keep these sort of larger powers at hand, but we don't directly attack the companies themselves. In the sense that, if we go back to the analogy of God and Christianity, if things went wrong, you blamed the church, but you didn't blame God. So God was something that was above reproach, but we did critique the church and what the church did. So what he then's talking about is that private companies have now sort of entered this space of we can just do whatever we want and we will not be held accountable for what we have done by the public, because the public will just point to the government and the state and blame them for not controlling things. And we can see this today in the sense that if companies does something that we do not like, for example, if it has to do with children and social media, or if it's about climate change, we don't hold the companies responsible. We hold the state responsible for not keeping the companies responsible. So that's how sort of the capitalism, according to Mark Fisher, has become the larger other that we are now having to relate to, whether we want to or not. It's not necessarily the easiest text to read if you do not have any academic background, as you can probably guess by the quote, but it's not the most difficult text I've ever read. He uses a lot of pop culture references and to illustrate what he is talking about. And also he, for example, when he's talking about other theorists or talking about other theories, he does usually explain what they mean. So it's mostly that you, for example, know what it means that we live in a postmodern society. What do we mean with sort of words on that type of level? So if you have sort of an introductional level to reading texts like these, this is very accessible in that sense. So that was Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism. And now I'm going to pick my next book out of this little jar. I'm going to pick one at the top that is bundled together. Should just read one book at a time. And we are reading number 6. Give me a moment and I'll find book number 6. Book number 6. Oh! So this is a graphic comic by Jason. I don't know what his original... Is it original Norwegian? I think it actually is. I think this is actually an original Norwegian comic. I called it a graphic comic. Comics like these. Reading off on the blurb. 2 childhood friends in the magical age where life seems like it will last forever. But then, in a brief moment, it's changed forever. I am going to read it and then let you know, and subscribe if you want to know my review of Jason. Wait a bit. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void, despite my horrible voice at the moment.